the blame is solely ours. But when we fail in attempting the impossible, we are justified in attributing it to the magnitude of the task. There is less risk in being discredited when trying the impossible than when trying the possible. It is thus a failure in everyday affairs often breeds an extravagant audacity. One gains the impression that the frustrated derive as much satisfaction, if not more, from the means of a mass movement uses as form the ends it advocates. The delight of the frustrated in chaos and in downfall of the fortunate and prosperous does not spring from an ecstatic awareness that they are clearing the ground for the heavenly city. In their fanatical cry of all or nothing at all, the second alternative echoes perhaps a more ardent wish than the first. Things which are not. 54. One of the rules that emerges from a consideration of the factors that promote self-sacrifice is that we are less ready to die for what we have or are than for what we wish to have and to be. It is a perplexing and unpleasant truth that when men already have something worth fighting for, they do not feel like fighting. People who live full, worthwhile lives are not usually ready to die for their own interests, nor for their country, nor for a holy cause. Craving, not having, is the mother of a reckless giving of oneself. Things which are not are indeed mightier than things that are. In all ages men have fought most desperately for beautiful cities yet to be built and gardens yet to be planted. Satan did not digress to tell all he knew when he said, "All that a man hath will he give for his life." All he hath, yes, but he sooner dies than yield aught of that which he hath not yet. It is strange indeed that those who hug the present and hang on to it with all their might should be the least capable of defending it, and that, on the other hand, those who spurn the present and dust their hands of it should have all its gifts and treasures showered on them unasked. Dreams, visions, and wild hopes are mighty weapons and realistic tools. The practical mindedness of a true leader consists in recognizing the practical value of these tools. Yet this recognition usually stems from a contempt of the present, which can be traced to a natural ineptitude in practical affairs. The successful businessman is often a failure as a communal leader because his mind is attuned to the things that are, and his heart set on which can be accomplished in our time. Failure in the management of practical affairs seems to be a qualification for success in the management of public affairs, and it is, perhaps, fortunate that some proud natures, when suffering defeat in the practical world, do not feel crushed, but are suddenly fired with the apparently absurd conviction that they are eminently competent to direct the fortunes of the community and the nation. The True Believer, 55. No, wait, that's on every page. It is not altogether absurd that the people should be ready to die for a button, a flag, a word, an opinion, a myth, and so on. It is, on the contrary, the least reasonable thing to give one's life for something palpably worth having. For surely one's life is the most real of all things. Real, and without it, there can be no having of things worth having. Self-sacrifice cannot be manifestation of a tangible self-interest. Even when we are ready to die in order not to get killed, the impulse to fight springs less from a self-interest than from intangibles such as tradition, honor, a word, and above all, hope. Where there is no hope, people either run or allow themselves to be killed without a fight. They will hang on to life as in a daze. How else explain the fact that millions of Europeans allowed themselves to be led into annihilation camps and gas chambers, knowing beyond doubt that they were being led to death? It was not the least of Hitler's formidable powers that he knew how to drain his opponents, at least in continental Europe, of all hope. His fanatical conviction that he was building a new order that would last 1,000 years communicated itself both to followers and antagonists. To the former it gave the feeling that in fighting for the Third Reich they were in league with eternity, while the latter felt that its struggle against Hitler's new order was to defy inexorable fate. It is of interest that the Jews who submitted to extermination in Hitler's Europe fought recklessly when transferred to Palestine, and though it is said that they fought in Palestine because they had no choice, they had to fight or have their throats cut by the Arabs, it is still true that their daring and reckless readiness for self-sacrifice sprang not from despair but from their fervent preoccupation with the revival of an ancient land and an ancient people. They indeed fought and died for cities yet to be built and gardens yet to be planted. Doctrine, 56. The readiness for self-sacrifice is conjugate on an imperviousness to the realities of life. He who is free to draw conclusions from his individual experience and observation is not usually hospitable to the idea of martyrdom, for self-sacrifice is an unreasonable act. It cannot be the end product of a process of probing and deliberating. All active mass movements strive therefore to interpose a fact-proof screen between the faithful and the realities of the world. They do this by claiming that the ultimate and absolute truth is already embodied in their doctrine and that there is no truth nor certitude outside it. The facts on which the true believer bases his conclusions must not be derived from his experience or observations, but from Holy Writ. So tenaciously should we cling to the world revealed by the gospel, that were I to see all the angels of heaven coming down to me to tell me something different, not only would I not be tempted to doubt a single syllable, but I would shut my eyes and stop my ears, for they would not deserve to be either seen or heard. To rely on the evidence of the senses and the reason is hearsay and treason. It is startling to realize how much unbelief is necessary to make belief possible. What we know as blind faith is sustained by innumerable unbeliefs. The fanatical Japanese in Brazil refused to believe for years the evidence of Japan's defeat. The fanatical communist refused to believe any unfavorable report or evidence about Russia. Nor would he be disillusioned by seeing with his own eyes the cruel misery inside the Soviet promised land. It is the true believer's ability to shut his eyes and stop his ears to facts that do not deserve to be either seen nor heard, which is the source of his unequaled fortitude and constancy. He cannot be frightened by danger, nor disheartened by obstacles, nor baffled by contradictions because he denies their existence. Strength of faith, as Bergerson pointed out, manifests itself not in moving mountains, but in not seeing mountains to move. And it is the certitude of his infallible doctrine that renders the true believer impervious to the uncertainties, surprises, and the unpleasant realities of the world around him. Thus, the effectiveness of a doctrine should not be judged by its profundity, sublimity, or vitality of the truths it embodies, but by how thoroughly it insulates the individual from his self and the world as it is. What Pascal said of an effective religion is true of any effective doctrine. It must be contrary to nature, to common sense, and to pleasure. 57. The effectiveness of a doctrine does not come from its meaning, but from its certitude. No doctrine, however profound and sublime, will be effective unless it is presented as the embodiment of one and only truth. It must be the one word from which all things are and all things speak. Crude absurdities, trivial nonsense, and sublime truths are equally potent in readying people for the self-sacrifice if they are accepted as the sole internal truth. It is obvious, therefore, that in order to be effective, a doctrine must not be understood, but is rather to be believed in. We can't be absolutely certain only about things we do not understand. A doctrine that is understood is shorn of its strength. Once we understand a thing, it is as if we had originated in us, and clearly those who are asked to renounce the self and sacrifice it cannot see the eternal certitude in anything which originates in that self. The fact that they understand a thing fully impairs its vitality and certitude in their eyes. The devout are always urged to seek the absolute truth with their hearts and not their minds. It is the heart which is conscious of God, not the reason. Rudolf Hess, when swearing in the entire Nazi Party in 1934, exhorted his hearers, "Do not seek Adolf Hitler with your brains. All of you will find him with the strength of your hearts." When a movement begins to rationalize its doctrine and to make it intelligible, it is a sign that the dynamic span is over, that is primarily interested in stability. For as will be shown later, section 106, the stability of a regime requires the allegiance of the intellectuals, and also see Treason of the Intellectuals, a different book. And it is to win them rather than to force a self-sacrifice in the masses that a doctrine is made intelligible. Again, see a book called Treason of the Intellectuals. If a doctrine is not unintelligible, it has to be vague, and if neither unintelligible nor vague, it has to be unverifiable. One has to get to heaven or the distant future to determine the truth of an effective doctrine. When some part of a doctrine is relatively simple, there is a tendency among the faithful to complicate and obscure it. Simple words are made pregnant with meaning and made to look like symbols in a secret message. There is thus an illiterate air about the most literate true believer. He seems to use words as if he were ignorant of their true meaning. Hence, too, his taste for quibbling, hair-splitting, and scholastic tortedness. 58. To be in possession of an absolute truth is to have a net of familiarity spread over the whole of eternity. There are no surprises and no unknowns. All questions have already been answered, all decisions made, all eventualities foreseen. The true believer is not without wonder and hesitation. Who knows Jesus knows the reason of all things. The true doctrine is a master key to all the world's problems. With it, the world can be taken apart and put together. The official history of the Communist Party states the power of Marxist-Leninist theory lies in the fact that it enables the party to find the right orientation in any situation, to understand the interconnection of current events, to foresee their course, and to perceive not only how and in what direction they are developing in the present, but how and in what direction they are bound to develop in the future. The true believer is emboldened to attempt the unprecedented and impossible, not only because his doctrine gives him a sense of omnipotence, but also because it gives him unqualified confidence in the future. See Section 4. An active mass movement rejects the present and centers its interest on the future. It is from this attitude that it derives its strength, for it can proceed recklessly with the present, with the health, wealth, and lives of its followers. But it must act as if it had already read the book of the future and the last word. Its doctrine is proclaimed as a key to that book. 59. Are the frustrated more easily indoctrinated than the non-frustrated? Are they more credulous? Pascal was of the opinion that one was well-minded to understand Holy Writ when one hated it oneself. There is apparently some connection between dissatisfaction with oneself and a proneness to credulity. C-R-E-D-U-L-I-T-Y. The urge to escape our real self is also an urge to escape the rational and the obvious. The refusal to see ourselves as we are develops the distaste for the facts and cold logic. There is no hope for the frustrated in the actual and the possible. Salvation can come to them only from the miraculous, which seeps through a crack in the iron wall of inexorable reality. They ask to be deceived. What streams them, said the Germans, is true of the frustrated in general. They pray not only for their daily bread, but also for their daily illusion. The rule seems to be that those who find no difficulty in deceiving themselves are easily deceived by others. They are easily persuaded and led. A peculiar side of credulity is that it is often joined with a proneness to imposture. The association of believing and lying is not characteristic solely of children. The instability and unwillingness to see things as they are promotes both gullibility and charlatanism. Fanaticism. 60. It was suggested in Section 1 that mass movements are often necessary for the realization of drastic and abrupt changes. It seems strange that even practical and desirable changes, such as the renovations of stagnant societies, should require the realization an atmosphere of intense passion and should have to be accompanied by all the faults and follies of an active mass movement. The surprise lessens when we realize that the chief preoccupation with an active mass movement is to instill in its followers a facility for united action and self-sacrifice, and that it achieves this facility by stripping each human entity of its distinctness and autonomy and turning it into an anonymous particle with no will and no judgment of its own. The result is not only a compact and fearless following, but also a homogeneous plastic mass that can be kneaded at will. The human plastic tree, necessary for the realization of drastic and abrupt changes, seems therefore to be a byproduct of the process of unification and of the inclination of a readiness for self-sacrifice. The important point is that estrangement from the self, which is a precondition for both plastic tree and conversion, almost always proceeds with an atmosphere of intense passion. For not only is the stirring of passion an effective means of upsetting an established equilibrium between a man and his self, but it is also the inevitable byproduct of such an upsetting. Passion is released even when the estrangement from the self is brought about by the most unemotional means. Only the individual who has come to terms with his self can have a dispassionate attitude toward the world. Once the harmony with the self is upset and the man is impelled to reject, renounce, distrust, or forget his self, he turns into a highly reactive entity. Like an unstable chemical radical, he hungers to combine with whatever comes within his reach. He cannot stand apart, poised and self-sufficient, but has to attach himself wholeheartedly to one side or another. By kindling and fanning violent passions in the hearts of their followers, mass movements prevent the settling of an inner balance. They also employ direct means to effect an enduring estrangement from the self. They depict an autonomous, self-sufficient existence not only as barren and meaningless, but also as depraved and evil. Man on his own is a helpless, miserable, and sinful creature. His only salvation is in rejecting his self and in finding a new life in the bosom of a holy corporate body, be it a church, a nation, or a party. In its turn, the vilification of the self keeps passions at a white heat. 61. The fanatic is perpetually incomplete and insecure. He cannot generate self-assurance out of his individual resources, out of his rejected self, but finds it only by clinging passionately to whatever support he happens to embrace. This passionate attachment to the essence of his blind devotion and religiosity, and he sees in it the source of all virtue and strength. Through his single-minded dedication as a holding on for dear life, he easily sees himself as a supporter and defender of the holy cause to which he clings, and he is ready to sacrifice his life to demonstrate to himself and others that such indeed is his role. He sacrifices his life to prove his worth. It goes without saying that the fanatic is convinced that the cause he holds on to, monolithic and eternal, a rock of ages. Still, his sense of security is derived from his passionate attachment, and not from the excellence of his cause. The fanatic is not really a stickler to principle. He embraces a cause not primarily because of its justness and holiness, but because of his desperate need for something to hold on to. Often indeed it is